Welcome to the information session for potential applicants interested in the fiscal year 2022 competition for the discretionary grant program funding a National Center for Improving Teacher and Leader Professions to Better Serve Children with Disabilities, or listing number 84.325A. This competition falls under the Personnel Development Program, a discretionary grant program administered by the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. This information session will provide information about the notice inviting applications that was posted in the Federal Register on Thursday, March 31st, 2022. My name is David Gardino, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to provide information about this competition. Next slide. I'd like to go over some caveats before we begin this webinar. First, the intent of this presentation is to provide guidance only. The information contained in the webinar provides a general summary of the information contained in the notice inviting applications and the application package. Therefore, it is important that all prospective applicants read the entire notice, application package, and any additional relevant information. In addition, applicants are encouraged to listen to a more general webinar entitled Applying for the Office of Special Education Programs Discretionary Grants for an orientation to the overall application submission process. That webinar can be found at osepideas.work.org, the same location that houses the link to this recording. Next slide. Please be aware of application timelines. The notice inviting applications was published in the Federal Register on March 31st, 2022. The application deadline is May 31st, 2022, no later than 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Applicants should determine the corresponding time in your time zone and must allow time for uploading by the system. I'll discuss the implications of a late submission later in the session. Next slide. In addition to the notice inviting applications, important information is found in the application package. The application package is available on grants.gov and contains the most comprehensive information on this competition and how to apply. In it, you will find a Dear Applicant letter from Larry Wexler, Director of OSEP's Research Practice Division. That letter contains important information about this competition and highlights application requirements. The package includes the notice inviting applications, and it also includes important information about the submission procedures using the grants.gov system. As you review the application package, take a close look at the purpose of this funding as described in the absolute priority and the application requirements. Also, be sure to carefully review the process and the selection criteria that will be used to judge the quality of the applications. And finally, carefully review the general information provided in the application package, including the required forms and instructions for completing those forms. Next slide. In this next section, I'll cover some program information. Specifically, I'll go over the purpose of the program funding this priority and the absolute priority outlined, identify the eligible applicants and funding levels for the proposed National Center. Next slide. As outlined in Part D of the IDEA, the purpose of the Personnel Development Program, or PDP, is to help address state-identified needs for personnel in special education, early intervention, related services, and regular education, to work with children, including infants, toddlers, and youth with disabilities, and ensure that those personnel have the necessary skills and knowledge derived from the practices that have been determined through scientifically based research and experience to be successful in serving those children. Next slide. Consistent with the purpose of the program, this investment will fund a project that addresses the absolute priority specified in the notice inviting applications. That is, the purpose is to fund a cooperative agreement to establish and operate a National Center for Improving Teacher and Leader Professions to better serve children with disabilities. Next slide. Eligible applicants include SEAs, LEAs, institutes of higher education, and other public agencies, private nonprofit organizations, for the associated states and outlying areas, Indian tribes or tribal organizations, and for-profit organizations. Next slide. For this competition, plans are to make one award in the amount not to exceed $3.5 million for a single budget period of 12 months. The total project period is up to 60 months or 5 years. Next slide. In this next section, I'll cover expected project outcomes and activities, topics in the application narrative and the selection criteria used to evaluate applications, and application and general requirements for applications submitted under this program. Once again, Please note, this webinar provides a general summary of the information contained in the notice inviting application and the application package. If you intend to submit an application, please be sure to read carefully the entire notice and application package and review any additional relevant information. Next slide. The proposed center has 6 expected outcomes to be achieved at a minimum. Specifically, the outcomes include increased IHE capacity to offer high-quality instruction for their teacher and leader candidates, which may include virtual and hybrid models if needed due to temporary school closures. Increased IHE capacity to offer high-quality field experiences for their teacher and leader candidates, which may include virtual and hybrid models if needed due to temporary school closures. Next slide. Increased IHE capacity to embed evidence-based practices and culturally and linguistically responsive practices that are aligned to state certification and licensure standards and program approval requirements into teacher and leader preparation programs. Improved capacity of SEAs in collaboration with IHEs and LEAs to track and evaluate the impact that changes to certification and licensure standards and program approval requirements have on their ability to attract, prepare, and retain teachers and leaders, especially those from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds and those with disabilities. Next slide. Increased SEA, IHE, and LEA capacity to use multiple data sources to inform continuous improvement and alignment of their personnel preparation systems to attract, prepare, and retain teachers and leaders, especially those from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds and those with disabilities. And finally, increased capacity of SEAs, IHEs, and LEAs to scale up and sustain implementation of existing plans that align teacher and leader preparation systems to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, especially those from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds. Next slide. The notice lays out how the application narrative should be divided into 5 sections. These sections correspond to the selection criteria that are used to evaluate each application. They are significance, quality of project services, quality of the project evaluation, adequacy of resources and quality of the project personnel, and quality of the management plan. I will go over each of them briefly and point out in general terms what the narrative should address in each section. Please read the notice carefully since the information contained in the notice is much more detailed. Next slide. First, the application must demonstrate in the narrative section of the application under significance how the proposed project will 1, ensure the IHE educator preparation programs are recruiting and preparing teachers and leaders, including those from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds and those with disabilities, to implement evidence-based practices, high leverage practices, and culturally and linguistically responsive practices to support improved outcomes for students with disabilities. 2, demonstrate knowledge of and previous experience with using effective approaches to disseminate knowledge, tools, and resources to SEAs, LEAs, IHEs, and TA providers. And 3, demonstrate knowledge of and previous experience with implementing TA strategies and delivering evidence-based professional development to a variety of entities, including SEAs, LEAs, IHEs, or other nonprofit organizations that provide teacher and leader preparation and other TA providers. Next slide. Under the quality of project services, the narrative should demonstrate how the applicant will ensure equal access and treatment for members of groups that have been traditionally underrepresented based on race, color, national origin, gender, age, or disability. Achieve its goals, objectives, and intended outcomes by providing measurable intended outcomes and a logic model, and uses a conceptual framework to develop project plans and activities, and be based on current research and make use of evidence-based practices. Next slide. Under the quality of project services continue, the narrative should demonstrate how the applicant will develop products and provide services that are of high quality and sufficient intensity and duration to achieve the intended outcomes of the project, including how the proposed project intends to identify and develop products, its approach to universal or general TA, its approach to targeted specialized TA, and lastly, its approach to intensive or sustained TA. Next slide. Lastly, under quality of project services, the narrative should demonstrate how the applicant will develop products and implement services that maximize efficiency and develop a dissemination plan and describe how the applicant will systematically distribute information, products, and services to promote awareness and the use of center's products and services. Next slide. Under the quality of the project evaluation section, the applicant must include an evaluation plan for the proposed project in consultation with a third-party evaluator. The evaluation plan must articulate formative and summative evaluation questions, including important process and outcome evaluation questions. These questions should be related to the project's proposed logic model. Describe how progress in and fidelity to implementation and project outcomes will be measured to answer evaluation questions. Describe strategies for analyzing data and how data will be collected. Provide a timeline for conducting the evaluation and assignments for completing the plan. And dedicate sufficient funds in each budget year to cover the costs associated with implementation of the evaluation plan by a third-party evaluator. Next slide. In the adequacy of resources and quality of project personnel section, the narrative should demonstrate how the project will encourage applicants for employment from persons who are members of groups that have traditionally been underrepresented based on race, color, national origin, gender, age, or disability as appropriate. The project key personnel, consultants and subcontractors have the qualifications and experience to carry out the proposed activities and achieve the project's intended outcomes. The applicant and any key partners have adequate resources to carry out the proposed activities, and the proposed costs are reasonable in relation to the anticipated results and benefits. Next slide. In the quality of management plan section, the narrative should demonstrate how the proposed management plan will ensure that the project's intended outcomes will be achieved on time and within budget, allocate key project personnel and any consultants and subcontractors to achieve the project's intended outcomes, and how these allocations are appropriate and adequate to achieve the project's intended outcomes, and ensure products and services provided are of high quality, relevant, and useful to recipients. Next slide. Continue from the prior slide, the quality of the management plan should address how the management project will benefit from a diversity of perspectives, including those of eligible children or students, families, educators, TA providers, researchers, and policymakers, among others. Maintain a high-quality website with easy-to-navigate design that meets government and industry standards. Ensure annual project progress in meeting project goals is posted on the website. Assist OSEP with the transfer of pertinent resources and products as needed. And maintain continuity of services during transition to a new award at the end of the project period if needed. Next slide. As part of the process of making funding recommendations, external reviewers will judge and score the quality of the application using selection criteria for each section as shown by the points allocated to each section in the narrative. The application package contains information on the sub-criteria within each selection criterion, and applicants are strongly encouraged to read these carefully when preparing the application narrative and use them to organize sections of the application narrative. Next slide. In addition to the narrative, a review of applications includes a review of the application and general requirements specified in the notice inviting applications. For this competition, applicants are asked to address the following requirements by including 1, a personnel loading chart and timelines in Appendix A to illustrate the management plan described in the narrative. 2, in the budget section, budget for attendance at several required meetings and conferences, such as a 1.5-day kickoff meeting in DC or maybe held virtually within 30 days after receipt of the award, a 2.5-day project conference in DC or virtually annually, and any other meeting specified in the notice. Also important in the budget section, an annual set aside of 5% to support emerging needs consistent with the project's purpose. Additional application requirements include maintaining a high quality website, ensure that annual project progress toward meeting project goals is posted on the project website, and assurance to assist OSEP with the transfer of pertinent resources and products and maintain the continuity of services to eligible children and students during the transition to this new award period and at the end of the award period as appropriate. Next slide. In this next section, I will cover some general information related to submitting an application. Once again, please refer to the notice for additional information. Please note that applications must be submitted electronically in the grants.gov system. See grants.gov submission procedures and tips for applicants included in the application package for more detail. We strongly recommend that you do not wait until the last day to submit your application. Grants.gov will put a date timestamp on your application and then process it after it is fully uploaded. The time it takes to upload an application will vary depending on several factors, including the size of the application, the speed of your internet connection, and the time it takes grants.gov to process the application, which will vary as well. Further, if grants.gov rejects your application, you will need to resubmit successfully to grants.gov before 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m. Eastern Time on the deadline date. If there are reasons why an applicant cannot submit using grants.gov, the applicant must follow the information contained in the application package precisely. Please note, applications cannot be submitted by email and must be submitted prior to the deadline of 11:59 and 59 seconds on May 31st, and are uploaded and then submitted. It is a two-step process, so it takes longer than you think it will. We strongly encourage applicants to submit all narratives and attachments in PDF read-only, not a non-modifiable format. Next slide. In order to make sure that the application is submitted on time and correctly, please register as early as possible in grants.gov and start the application process. Do not wait until you have the application ready to register. Grants.gov will create a workspace for applicants to submit the sections of the application over time. If you are already registered, make sure your registration is current. Submit early, a day or more in advance if possible. Should there be any problems with the grants.gov system, submitting early will allow you time to correct the problem and resubmit before the deadline. Verify that the submission is okay. Grants.gov will send applicants notification that the submission was on time and validated. So applicants should make sure that they receive that confirmation and not assume the submission was okay. Next slide. Some additional tips for applying for this grant program include: pay attention to the maximum funding levels for the grant as contained in the notice. Awards will not be made for amounts higher than the published amounts. Follow the recommended organization, page limits, spacing, and font sizes. To facilitate the application review process, the applicant should strongly consider following the recommendations. PDF files make it easier for the system to put together different parts of the application into one application that reviewers can more easily read and follow. The grants.gov submission procedures and tips for applicants in the application package can be extremely helpful for submitting the application in grants.gov. Please ask me if you have further questions. Next slide. Once received, all applications are screened to determine eligibility for the competition. Those found eligible for review will be reviewed as described above. Those ineligible will not be reviewed. Some common reasons that an applicant may be ruled ineligible are: an application submitted more than once, and the application was validated more than once, so duplicate applications are received. In that case, the last application submitted will be considered, and previous applications will be considered duplicates and therefore ineligible for review. There are two additional reasons why an application may not be eligible. First, all applications received after the published deadline will not be eligible for funding. And second, applications that do not address the priority will also not be eligible for funding. For example, an application proposing to build a school, purchase equipment for a classroom, establish an after-school program, or provide tutoring services for children with disabilities would not be eligible, since that is not the purpose of this priority. Last slide. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar covers highlights of what's contained in the notice inviting applications and application package. If you have additional questions, please contact me by email at david.gardino@ed.gov. Email is the preferred approach. You may also contact me by phone at 202-245-6209. Leave a voice message and I will return your call. Thank you. This concludes the session.